Morning. We are holding on page Tes Zion, line 13, second paragraph on the page, by the words Omnam. And we are in the middle of explaining the idea of Ohr Ayn Sof l'mayla mayla den teketz, or l'mata mata den tachlis, that it's talking about the infinite light of Hashem, has the way it is in its essence, it's a level of complete unity and oneness, but because of that complete unity and oneness, that pure, non-complex essence, from that comes out the level of the many myriad possibilities of levels, the levels of spheres Aden Ketz, which is something that is manifest in the Ohr Ayn Sof Shlifnat Tzimtzum. The later, as we're going to speak about, it also goes on further throughout Seder Ishtalshalos. The infinite aspect of the light manifests there as well. And this is all in continuation to what we spoke about, that the Ohr, since it's Ma'ein HaMoir, since it's similar to the luminary, therefore it has the same properties as the luminary, that it's infinite without any limitations. So line 13, page Tazai. All of this applies, that there's an idea of Oilimus and Spheres Aden Ketz, a non-ending level of worlds and spheres, is only in the level that's beyond Tzimtzum. Sham Dafki Yashnain, the Spheres and Ketz, only over there specifically, there's spheres to no end. Kidu Amashkas, the Maimer Shal Morazokin, Shemevi as a Machzadik Muksav Yadarav Pinchas. Like it's known what the Alter Rebbe writes in a Maimer. Some Machzadik brings us down from a handwritten manuscript of the Pinchas Rises. Dibra Maskal Shishim Hem Malachis, a mimer with the title Shishim are the Malachis are the queens. It's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. The beer Indian the spheres ain't cats. That over there the Alter Rebbe explains in that mimer the idea of an infinite amount of spheres. What is that concept that's brought down in Kabbalah, that there's spheres to no end, as opposed to when we speak about and say that there's 10 spheres. So the Alter Rebbe explains, Atzilus and Bahus, Loi Shaykh initial spheres klal. In Hashem's very essence, the whole idea of spheres is not applicable whatsoever. Tzimtzum, Loi Shaykh Lemer spheres ain't ketz. And after the Tzimtzum, you cannot have an unending number of spheres. After the Tzimtzum, spheres are in general expressed in the number 10. Therefore, Kivin Shisham Yesham as a sphere, since after the Tzimtzum there are 10 spheres, like the Sefer Yetzirah says, Eser v'loy Teisha, 10 and not 9, Eser v'loy Chados, or 10 and not 11. Hainu, Loidak Eser v'loy Teisha, not only is it no less than 10, not 9, Elagam, Eser v'loy Chados, or not even 11, meaning she einam yoser master. So it's limited. It's not even more than 10. So for sure, it's not a level of spheres Aden Ketz. For sure, it's not a level of non-ending spheres. So therefore, when we have the term brought on Kabbalah, that there's spheres Aden Ketz, there's an unending number of spheres. Only higher than the Tzimtzum, there's Yeshna in the spheres Aden Ketz. That there's the idea of spheres to no end. Now, to elaborate further on this distinction between the spheres as they are prior to the Tzimtzum versus the spheres as they are after the Tzimtzum, so now the Rebbe says, going back to the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe in chapter 12 of the Hemshech of Basi Lagani, that this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe is referring to. Maimer concerning this, he continues in the Maimer last paragraph in this page. Quote, the Frierdiker Rebbe says in his Maimer, the fact that the spheres were emanated in a number 10, specifically 10, so idea Tzimtzum, it's through the Tzimtzum, meaning prior to the Tzimtzum, there was no idea of spheres being limited to 10. Now, the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to say, yet, despite this difference we just now said, that before the Tzimtzum, the spheres are in the number 10. I'm sorry, and beyond the number 10, it's unending. And after the Tzimtzum and through the Tzimtzum, they came out to be a number 10. Still in all, even after the Tzimtzum, top of page Yud Zayin, still in all, worlds without boundary and worlds without number came into being. So the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this quote of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The idea behind this is the hine kasher asfiris nimshachim olam atzilus, when the spheres come down into the world of Atzilus. Those Atzilus is known as the world of unity. It's still one with Hashem. It's not like Bria, that's already a created entity. A created entity indicates that something new, something separate from the Creator. So it's a world of unity with Hashem. And the spheres in the world of Atzilus are not, if you will, substantial. It doesn't have substance, meaning it lacks that idea of being a created entity, something separate from the Eibishter. Still in all, despite all of these things that should make the spheres less limited, they are specifically in the number 10. And not, like we said before, not 9, not 11. The Yeseirim is even more so. Gamma Spheres Agnuza is even a higher level. That's known as the concealed spheres. They are also Heim B'mispar Eser Dafka. They are specifically the number of 10. Eser V'loi Teisha, Eser V'lechados are 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. So he says, the question is seemingly there's a difficulty with this. Since on their own, the spheres are unending. Like we said, that the spheres before the Tzimtzum, the initial place where spheres began, is in a state of being unending spheres. How did it come about? That in Atzilus, there's the number of 10 spheres. In other words, before we know the statement of the Frierdiker Rebbe, for that, the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Maimer, you know how it happened. It's the Tzimtzum. The idea behind this is that's because of the first constriction and the empty space that was left, that the Ohr Ayn Sof was like emptied out to leave a space for the world and for existence. That's the first Tzimtzum that has completely removed the original light, which is the distinction between the first Tzimtzum and all other Tzimtzumim. All other Tzimtzumim, let's say between the worlds of Atzilus and Bri, or Bri Yitzira, or Ak and Akudim, and so on, these are all Tzimtzumim of a lessening of the light. It's called Miyut Ha'or. Tzimtzum addition, the first Tzimtzum is something that's a Tzimtzum that's called that the light was completely removed. And we started over like from scratch. We brought down the Kav and so on and so forth. Since through the Tzimtzum being such a powerful Tzimtzum, a Tzimtzum where it was completely erased everything that was there beforehand, so now the light and the revelation that comes out after the Tzimtzum and as a result of the Tzimtzum comes out in a measured way, in a way of a boundary. Therefore, it affected as well that the spheres that now comes out after the Tzimtzum is now in a number 10, instead of the way they were prior to the Tzimtzum, that they were infinite spheres. Now the Rebbe goes on to explain what the Frierdiker Rebbe says in his Maimer. Concerning this, he explains in the Maimer, in the bleak vul, the idea of being without a boundary. The Frierdiker Rebbe also added that after the Tzimtzum, there was now 10 spheres, still in all, despite that, like we had at the top of our page, the quote from Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, despite that, there came into being worlds without boundary, without measure. So he says, he's going to elaborate on the statement. Even after a Tzimtzum, it becomes already the limitation, the boundary of 10 and not 9 spheres. 10 and not 11 spheres. There still is the idea of spheres in a way that's without a boundary. So he's going to explain what this means. That they are definitely numbered. They definitely have a count to them, as opposed to the spheres before the Tzimtzum, but it had no number to it. And there were many more spheres that, of a variety that we didn't even know what they are. But there's a different way how the 10 spheres have no boundary to them. So he's going to explain, like the Alter Rebbe explains, is brought down in a mimer known as the three views, and at greater length in many Mamorim, that at the time when the Rebbe said this mimer in Tavshich Beis in 1962, it was not yet printed. The Spheres of Atzilus, they are still in Atzilus, they are without a boundary. So true, they have a boundary in the fact that they are, for example, 10 and not 9, or 10 and not 11. But for example, one of the ways how one can express the unbounded aspect of the Spheres the way they are in Atzilus is Chachma, the way it's not Atzilus, is Chachma without an end. Chesed, the way it's not Atzilus, is Chesed without an end. Malchus, the way it's not Atzilus, is Malchus without an end. So we still see a trickle-down effect, that the unlimited aspect of the Ohr Ayn Sof doesn't just stop by the Tzimtzum, but it is continued into the Spheres, though they have already the limitations of being 10, the infinite aspect, the unbounded aspect of before the Tzimtzum comes down to them as well. The last line on the page, to such a degree that we say that the Spheres, the way they are in Atzilus, are without a boundary. Top of page Yudches. The Bri Yitzirasi Hashem Nevroim Mugbalim, so they should be able to be the creations of the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi, of the words of Bia following Atzilus, that they are limited and bounded creations. So there needed to be a special transition, because the Spheres and Atzilus are still infinite, and you need to create things that are finite in the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi. Therefore, there needed to be a process which should transition and change from the infinite of Atzilus into the finite of Bria. Line 2, this is something called the shoe of the Shechina that we'll soon explain. It's a certain type of malachim, like it says in the pasuk in Shir Hashirim also, "My yofu pamayich banolim." How beautiful are your footsteps in the shoes. What's the shoes? What's the spiritual connotation of shoes? There are two major malachim that they are, if you will, extensions and continuations of the level of Malchus, or Malchus is enclosed in them, and via their type of separation and transition is it able to go from the infinite of Atzilus to the finite creations of Bri Yitzirasi. A shoe is very simple. A shoe separates, and the Rebbe speaks about it in different places. A shoe separates between the person and the ground. There has to be that the person has to be higher than and removed from earthiness. So therefore, he wears a shoe to make that distinction. In a holy place, like for example, the Beis Hamikdash or Moshe Rabbeinu being told at the burning bush, so he had to remove his shoes because of the holiness of the place. You did not separate between the two. But the idea of the shoe in general is about that separation and that removal. And in this case, it's the separation and removal and cutting off of the infinite nature of Atzilus, even though it's not infinite in number of spheres, but there are other aspects of infinitude over there that it should be able to allow for. That in the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi, there should be finite creations. Then he goes on further, line 4, V'yisedim is even more so. Shafil the spheres of Malchus, even the sphere of Malchus, that's the end, the last level of the world of Atzilus. To such a degree, Malchus considered the beginning of the worlds as the source and the root for the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi. So therefore, one might think that Malchus would have been able on its own, which Malchus corresponds to the level of Shechina, would have been able on its own to be the transition that there should be able to be the finite creations of Bri Yitzirasi. Kivin sheklolos inyanahu inyan hagilui va'oisias. Why is Malchus considered, even while it's not Atzilus, the beginning and the source for the worlds of Bri Yitzirasi? Because The general idea of Malchus is about revelation. The general idea of Malchus is language and letters. And just like by a person, letters and words, that is meant as a channel and a means for revelation. So the same thing, Malchus is already the beginning and the source for something that's going to become revealed in Bri Yitzir Asiyah. So why do we need something further than Malchus? Why do we need to have these malachim of matat and sandal? Why do we need to have the shechina to put on the shoe to be able to allow for the infinite level of Atzilus to come down to Biyah? Still in all, the Rebbe says, not line 8, the way Malchus is not Atzilus, the way the revelation and the letters and language of Malchus is still part of Atzilus before it transitioned to be able to come down to Biyah, they are letters without a boundary. And since they have no boundary, no end, so they would be overwhelming to the worlds, the creations, and Bri Yitzir Asiyah. Therefore, it's necessary for that transition. It's necessary for Malchus to dress itself in a shoe. It's necessary for the Malachim of Matat and Sandal to create that separation and that transition to be able to come down from the infinite levels of Atzilus to be able to come and create finite creations in the worlds of Biyah. Line 9, the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe continues, also what it says in the part of the Zohar known as the Ider Rabba, that in the level of the skull is usually associated with a level that's higher than Atzilus. So, in other words, he's going to challenge that even higher than Atzilus, we have seemingly limitations already. It says over there, it says, Yasve, it's settled over there, it sits over there, Treisar Alfin Almin, that there's 12,000 worlds of in the level of Golgalta, in the level of the skull. Usually it's associated with Kesser and so on. So therefore we find already a limitation. True, 12,000 is a lot, but it's still a limitation. So we already find a certain amount of limitation in higher than Atzilus even. So why are we so concerned that the transition from Atzilus to Biyah won't work because of the infinite state of Atzilus? So he says, the idea of the 12,000 worlds is only relative to the topic spoken about over there. It's not the sum total, it's not the complete thing. That's not the complete picture. This number of 12,000, it's only in relation to the topic that he's speaking over there in that part of Zohar known as the Ider Rabba. But in truth, who believe at the amount of worlds that there is in the level of the Golgalta and the level of the skull is really unbounded and infinite. And therefore, don't ask me a question and say, how can Atzilus be called infinite if even higher than Atzilus there's already limited worlds? He says, no, it's not limited worlds. The fact that it says the number 12,000 is only concerning what he's speaking about over there. Not he's limiting and saying there's only 12,000 worlds. Like the Tzimtzum Tzedek explains in his notes that the Tzimtzum Tzedek wrote on the Mamarim Dal Rebbe to the Torah on Parsha Midbar. That the thousands and tens of thousands of worlds that are settled over there in the level of the skull are not quite the levels of worlds. We have this also in Tanya in the Geras HaKodesh. So why then do we call worlds? Worlds indicate a limitation. So he says, when they descend down here below, it becomes down into them worlds in actuality. Perhaps the phrasing of the question, I may have misphrased it or misplaced it. I was asking the question, the way I explained it just a moment ago is, how do you say it's only 12,000 if it's if it should be unlimited? I think perhaps the question is, how do you call it worlds? Worlds show on a limitation. And so he says, only in regards to what we're speaking about over there, and this we had already in Geras HaKodesh, and this is the same thing that the Tzimtzum Tzedek says, in regards to what it speaks about over there, we call it worlds. but it's not, and which worlds connotes limitations. But in truth, it's not a level of true worlds. It's only called worlds because eventually from that is going to become the idea of worlds as we know it in actuality. This is similar. We find this a lot of times in Chassidus, that certain source levels are called by a certain term and a certain name, even though they themselves are completely removed from it. When we say, for example, in Paschal Yo, we say about the Chachma Atzilus, we say, Antu Chakim v'lo b'Chachma Yediyah. You are wise, but not with the Chachma that's known. So it's brought down in Chassidus that really it's totally not Chachma as we know it, but because it's eventually a source for what we're going to know as Chachma, so we already give it that label Chachma above. Or we have this also towards the end of Tanya. It speaks about Eitz Hadas, that how do you call Torah Shabbat Peh Eitz Hadas, or how do you call Malchus Atzilus Eitz Hadas? How can you say it's Toivara? It's not Toivara. There's no Ra over there, Chas v'Sholom, and there's no Ra in the Torah, Chas v'Sholom. And then he continues and says, yes, it is called Eitz Hadas Toivara. Torah Shabbat Peh is called Eitz Hadas Toivara. Malchus Atzilus is called Eitz Hadas Toivara. Why? Because it is the source of Toivara as we know down here. It is the possibility, is the root, etc. for Toivara that's down here. So we find this a lot of times in Chassidus that will use a certain term that's really not really applicable in a certain level, but because it's the root and the source for that thing later on, so we're going to call it by that term. So the same thing that Rebbe is saying over here, taking from the Tzemach Tzedek and the Geras HaKodesh, that the fact that we see limitations even higher than Atzilus, even in the level of the Galgalta, the limitations that we're seeing, put aside what we said before about the number, but the limitations that we're seeing is that we're calling it worlds, and worlds indicate limitation. So that Rebbe says it doesn't mean literally worlds. It's just in regards to what he talked about over there that we're calling it worlds. Why is it called worlds then? Because it's worlds, because the source, what's eventually going to be called worlds down here. But it's not the true idea of worlds, and therefore it's not the true idea of limitation. And even in Atzilus, there's no true limitation. And the only way I can come to the limitation of Bri Yitzir Asiyah is only through the agency of these two malachim, Matat and Sandal, known as the Shu of the Shechina and so on. Line 18 calls a movement from all this is understood. The idea that the infinite light of the Eibishter goes down below to no end, which now we're going to finally conclude the definition of that. That the revelation of the Ayn Sof is not just that the infinitude of the Ayn Sof is only before the Tzimtzum. And once the Tzimtzum comes into place, that's it. There's no more power of the infinite. No. The infinite of the Ayn Sof, is not just manifest before the Tzimtzum, also after the Tzimtzum, the infinite level of the Ein Sof comes down as well. Any questions?
How can you have the infinitude in Atzilus, but Atzilus is in a Keli? The Keli can't be infinite as well.
So there's different explanations for it. The infinite aspect of the Keli is in infinite in what it can do, not in what it is. So, for example, the Kli HaChochma is infinite in regards, or in general, all the Kelim of Atzilus are considered infinite because they can create Yesh Me'ayin, like the Alter Rebbe says in that famous Geras HaKodesh Siman Chof that we've been referring to the whole time. So that is its infinite power. So it has an infinite power, but it doesn't. But it's finite, if you will, for lack of a better expression, in actual space. In the space it takes up, it's finite. That's one of the ways of explaining. There's different explanations for it. Sometimes it's explained that the Oidus of Atzilus are infinite and the Kelim of Atzilus are finite. There are different explanations for the infinite aspect of Atzilus.
In some respect, it is a constriction. I mean, it is bounded.
Well, the very fact that you're saying that it's 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, that shows that's already limited. True. But despite that, it still has, there's the trickle-down effect, if you will, of the Ohr Ayn Sof. Since it's Lamata Mata Den Tachlis, that even into the worlds, that infinite of the Ein Sof comes down as well. So it doesn't just totally stop at the border of the Tzimtzum, that when you have the Tzimtzum Arishon, boom, it stops, no more infinite. It comes down further also. But over there, there's already a bit of a tension between the finite and the infinite and so on.
Is a spherot in a world the same thing?
No, the spheres are the highest component of the world. It's the energy and the life force and the vitality of the world.
How do you define a world?
There's neshamas in the world, there's malachim in the world, there's different chambers that's brought down in the world. There's so many things in the world that we don't know what they are. The spheres themselves, I remember when I was first learning Chassidus as a kid, bar mitzvah age, higher, I thought, what is Atzilus? Atzilus is the 10 spheres. What is Bria? It's the 10 spheres of Bria. But it's not true. That's the light of the world, the energy of the world. Its entire vitality comes from there. And then from the spheres are created all the different beings that inhabit and all the different things that exist in that world.
How do you define a world? When we say, you keep saying plural worlds.
Worlds, because there is Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, Asiya. There is what's called the worlds that we spoke about before that are in the Galgalta. There's what's called something Chassidus refers to often as Ohr Ayn Sof. How do you define a world? That's a good question. It's quote unquote an area, though it's not a physical area, but it's a spiritual area that contains in it many different things, like neshamas and malachim and spheres and chambers and whatever else is there.
And there's infinite worlds even at our level?
What do you mean our level? Atzilus is down here, Bria is down here. If you're talking about level spiritually, no. Level spiritually, we're at the bottom all the way after the end of Asiya or the lowest level of Asiya. Of course, there's no infinite over there in the simple sense. There is still, we're going to talk about the trickle-down effect of Hashem's infinite power even down here. That's what it means, Ohr Ayn Sof, Lamata Mata Dein Tachlis, that even in our world, we're going to see evidence and manifestations of Hashem's infinite being. Let's actually learn a little bit further to see how we see that in our world. Hey, let's learn at least another small paragraph. Line 23. The Maimer continues from the level of Malchus Atzilus, comes the multiplicity and the coming into being of things without number. Like it says in the pasuk, Morabu Masecho Magodlu Masecho. Top of page Yutes. What does that mean? Shem Ribui Hanivroim. Literally, how many creations there are, that there's innumerable amount of created beings. The G'doyle Hanivroim, and how great and awesome and how massive and huge the Nivroim are. So this is all as a result of the infinite power of Hashem as it manifests itself through Malchus Atzilus. The idea behind this is even after it comes down from Atzilus to Bria Yitzir Vasiya. And we said before, there's a transition and there is a limitation that takes place. Because now the Shekhinah through becoming enclosed in the shoe of the Shekhinah. Shehema Malachim B'chlal. That Malachim in general are called the shoe of the Shekhinah. B'frat HaMalachim Matat v'Sandal K'Niskaleel, especially the Malachim known as Matat and Sandal. These are the ones that cause that and transition from Atzilus into Biyam. And therefore, through that becomes creations that are now separated from Hashem, which in Atzilus we said it's Olam HaAchdus, it's completely one with Hashem. But now they become separate entities. These are the great creations that upon them and about them it says that how great are your doings, meaning these malachim, these entities that are cause of transition, are the levels of Hashem's or manifestation of Hashem's greatness. In general, it's the hosts of heaven that in them is emphasized the idea of greatness. Hosts of heaven could be the Malachim could be called the heavenly host. And also, as we'll talk about, that it can also mean literally the sun, the moon, the stars, and so on. The Heinan Evroim, the Tzva Aretz, and also the creations of the hosts of the land of the earth. Literally, things that are on the earth are in an unbelievable number. Concerning the hosts of this earth, all the many creations of this earth, they are so great, so numerous, excuse me. So also in this, in the great creations and the innumerable creations, there's also the idea of being unbounded and without boundary, without number. Not just the potential of Bligvul, as for example, there's a potential in creation, that meaning that every human being can potentially have many innumerable offspring. So there's a potential of Bligvul. But not only is there potential Bligvul, Alagam Bligvul Apoil, there's actually an unlimited aspect in the creation. And this is all a manifestation of Hashem's infinite nature that we say, Ohr Ayn Sof Lamata Mata Dein Tachlis, the infinite light of Hashem is below to no end. And the Maimer is going to go on to explain where is it and how is it that we see in the creation the idea of the infinite. We'll stop over here.
I have another question.
Okay.
So if I look in the